The adequate notice of this regular meeting as required by the Open Public Meetings Act was provided by the posting, mailing, delivery, and filing of this notice on January 12, 2024. This notice was on that date posted on the bulletin board in the Township office, sent to the Courier News and Tap into Warren, and filed with the Township Clerk of the Township of Warren, all in accordance with the requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Hagel.
Right, I'll call the roll now. Mrs. Dalton.
Here.
Mr. Desai.
Here.
Ms. Keller. Mr. Molfetta.
Here.
Mr. Otto. Mr. Tor. Here. Mr. Valentino. Mr. Weinstein.
Here.
Mrs. Zahn.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Mr. Weinstein.
Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act NJSA 10-4-11 permits the Board of Education to meet in closed session to discuss certain matters now, therefore it be resolved. The Board of Education adjourns to closed sessions to discuss a matter involving the purchase, lease, or acquisition of real property with public funds, pending or anticipated litigation or contract negotiation and/or matters of attorney-client privilege, and material the disclosure of which constitutes an unwarranted invasion of individual privacy. Action will be taken upon return to public session. The length of the meeting is anticipated to be approximately 60 minutes. And be it further resolved, the minutes of this closed session be made public when the need for confidentiality no longer exists.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The board is now in executive session. All right.
Motion to return to open session.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain, opposed? The board is now back in regular session. Mr. Weinstein.
Resolved that the Board of Education approves the public session minutes of the October 28th, 2024 board meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hagel.
Right, I will call the roll. Mrs. Dalton,
Yes.
Mr. Desai,
Yes.
Mr. Molfetta,
Yes.
Mr. Tor,
Yes.
Mr. Weinstein,
Yes.
Mrs. On.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Mr. Hagel. Dr. Mingle, correspondence and information.
The board is in receipt of one piece of correspondence, which was an email regarding an early childhood center. There were 2 HIB investigations reported, one at the middle school, which was founded, and one at Central School, which was not founded, and nothing on the suspension report.
Thank you, Dr. Mingle. Welcome, everybody, to the November Board of Education meeting. I would like to take a moment to congratulate Mr. Ryan Valentino on his successful election to a second full term on the Board of Education. Also, congratulations to Rich Molfetta for his election to his first full term on the Board of Education, and to Bridget Granholm, also elected to her first full 3-year term on the Board of Education. We welcome them back and welcome Bridget newly joining us on the board, and are very grateful for their commitment to the district and to our community. And the only other comment I have is Thanksgiving is coming up, and I hope that everybody enjoys safe travels if you are traveling. Peace if you are hosting, and enjoy the good food and company of loved ones. That's all I have. Dr. Mingle.
Yes, thank you. Staying with that theme on some community partnership topics. First, thank you to everyone who attended one of our strategic plan community input sessions. We held 2 sessions with students, 2 sessions with community members, and our facilitators did a great job. In addition, meeting with 3 groups of employees the next day. So that was very nice. For anybody who was unable to attend one of those sessions and would like to give feedback, there will be surveys available in early December. That'll go out through the community briefing. It will post it on the district website and most likely sent out by the township as well, so that residents who don't have children have the opportunity to participate in that survey as well. And the district's strategic plan engineering team, which is made up of almost 40 people, including board members, parents, community members without children, staff members, will be meeting for the first time next Tuesday night to start seeing some of the results of those input sessions and working on the next steps in the strategic planning process. To follow on the Thanksgiving point, I'd like to thank the Warren Township Lions Club, which every year supports families all throughout Warren Township with Thanksgiving meals. They've been a strong partner of the district for a very long time, even as the number of Thanksgiving meal requests from us for our families has gone from single digits to this year over 100, which we'll be picking up on Saturday from the Lions Club to be able to distribute next week. Our principals handle the distribution. Our buildings and grounds department handles picking them up and storing them over the weekend. It's quite a process from the Lions Club members and also from the district staff, but the families who receive those meals are extremely grateful. And so that's very nice for us to be able to do as a community. And I know we have some Lions Club members on the board as well. So thank you. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the strong and positive partnership between AlphaBest, who's our before and after care provider, and the district. As the board members know, and probably most of the members in the community who are watching, AlphaBest is the vendor that provides before and after care at our elementary schools. They also provide holiday care on school holidays for students across the district. And recently they've stepped up in two very significant ways that I just want you to be aware of. And Mr. Hagel and I are meeting with them soon about actually some additional partnerships for the future that are very exciting. But first, at no cost, AlphaBest provided staffing for the strategic plan community input sessions. That way, any community members who otherwise would not be able to attend but for childcare were able to come and have certified childcare provided for them at no cost, as I said. And second, AlphaBest is also providing before care to a family who's dealing with a personal circumstance where their schedule is upended. Through partnership with our building principal, members of the school district community, they have been able to provide at no cost to that family temporary before care that may be longer than just a few weeks, probably through the end of the school year, while they've been displaced due to a personal circumstance. And I think it's hard. AlphaBest is a company that we have a contract with. These partnerships are not required by our contract with them. And so I wanted to highlight it's more of a donated service. We'll be sending them a letter of thanks tomorrow on behalf of the district.
Thank you, Dr. Mingo. We have the annual presentation of the Student Achievement Report. Mr. Kimmick, I am turning it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. As you said, this is our annual testing report. I just want to remind the board and members of the public that this is actually a state required report. We've had access to this information for quite some time. It's been shared with the board already. Parents have received NJSLA results and their reports from home as well. So this is really a formal, just public discussion around the testing results and what those patterns look like for the benefit of the community and for the board. So today we're going to talk about these topics. I won't go through each one of them right now, but you can see there's a number of them that we'll address. Really what we're looking at is just the results from our ELA, our math, our science, and our access exams that take place at the end or second half of the school year last year. I think it's important to recognize that these are very summative in terms of they're done at the end of the year. They provide a snapshot of performance at the end of the year. We collect a lot of information across the year on our students. We look at that information very actively. We spend time actually looking at a variety of benchmarks within the district itself. So this is one source of information that we try to actually put side by side with all that other information about how students are doing in general and the patterns that we're seeing within the district. As I said before, we're going to be taking a look at ELA. We're going to be taking a look at math. All students in grades 3 through 8 need to take those assessments. We also do end of course assessments for algebra and geometry. Those are two high school courses that are offered here. Students, again, that are successful in those courses actually will track into either geometry or algebra 2 at the high school. And then we also take NJSLA science only in 5th grade and only in 8th grade. So that is something, again, that's longitudinally hard to track with students because you're having a 3-year gap each time the students take that assessment. But we'll take a look at that as well. I also want to make mention, and I mention this every year, we have a very small number of students that take another kind of assessment called the dynamic learning map. That is an assessment that is really geared for students who cannot access, for whatever variety of reasons there might be, the NJSLA assessment. These are students many times that may have an individual education program and may need a different type of assessment to actually provide the look into the progress that they're making from year to year. So that number is so small that we don't report on that number here. But I do want to make mention of it publicly that we take that assessment. And then we also have a number of students that are identified as ELL students or multilingual students. These are students that come to us knowing another language and are, again, developing their English acquisition over time. It's really important that the way that the state is identifying these students has changed quite a bit. The certificate is still ELL for teachers and are still categories known as ELL, but really it's more appropriate to know these kids as multilingual students. And it's a much more positive term in the sense of these students already know language. They're learning a second language right now, and we shouldn't really in any way undervalue the fact that they already know a language. they come to us and now they're learning a second language, which is actually a great strength that these students have and something that they bring to our community. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. This is just a snapshot of what the assessments measure. If you've been on the board for a while, you're familiar with this. This is the same format that we've used in the past. But when we look at NJSLA for ELA, it's really focusing on reading and math. Or I'm sorry, reading and writing. That's a little bit different than what our iReady diagnostic does. The iReady diagnostic only focuses on reading. So when we get projections and things like that around what our ELA results might be, the challenge with that sometimes is that we don't have a writing view with our iReady results. So we try to project and we try to actually focus on those areas, but you can see the skills that are focused on and the domains within that assessment. In math, you can also see that idea of reasoning and modeling is very, very important to the math standards. And, you know, I know sometimes we'll have discussions just about students needing to be able to critique an answer or to be able to explain an answer. And that's something that's actually embedded very, very clearly within the standards. That ability to be able to clearly articulate their thinking is something that's very important for students' future math work as well. And there's a lot of work in terms of that taking place within the standards. I do want to make mention that these assessments do not measure every standard. I think that's important to remember as a board. And that every student, not every student, but there are about 6 or 7 different versions of this NJSLA assessment that's administered to students. So it's entirely possible that if you were, as members of the board, the students taking this assessment, that you would all have a different assessment. So it's really important to recognize that when we see samplings of some of the work that students do, and we do item analyses on these things, some of the standards may have all the students haven't taken that assessment. Some of the standards may only have 10 or 15 students responding to that particular question. So when we make a generalization about how is the whole district doing relative to a standard when only 15 or 20 students may have responded to a question around that standard, that's important to be careful about that. And we shouldn't dismiss it as something that we should look at, but we want to look at those numbers very carefully and look at the way that that breaks down in our assessments. This slide is just showing the levels of performance that you will see. Many of you are familiar with this. I did put in here for you just the scale score bands that take place. And I do that for you because at level 2 and at level 3, you see these are 25-point bands. They're smaller scoring bands than level 1, level 4, and level 5. So when we have students that are scoring at those levels, the hope is that they're going to be able to move through those levels fairly quickly. Students that are performing at a level 3 are fairly close to, many of them, fairly close to actually meeting expectations. And we want to be able to focus on that and be able to look at that carefully in terms of the types of supports that we can provide to students during the school year. Just some other areas of note to point out. This environment is really unlike any other testing environment that we do within schools. The security protocols, the way that we have to set up classrooms, the way that we have to cover information in rooms for students, it's just very, very different than a normal assessment situation that occurs across the school year for students. We wouldn't want to do that in every situation that we have because we would never have anything displayed in our classrooms and students wouldn't really enjoy school that much. But it is a very, very different kind of assessment environment that takes place during these assessments. We do, compared to our state data, do very, very well compared to the state, which we would expect. And the question the board always asks is, well, what about comparison districts? And that information is not available yet, but as we get more information that's released from the state, we're able to break that down across the year and be able to see how we do relative to other districts that are more like us. We did have very specific goals related to our performance that were strategic plan goals last year. We met both of those goals. We wanted to see an increase of at least 3% in both ELA and math over our 2022 scores. We had an increase of 3% in ELA. We had an increase of 6% in math last year. And we have goals very much like that again this year, where we want to see a collective increase across the board in terms of just overall performance. And then when we look at grade 5 science, we had an increase in our passing rate of 23% over last year. So that was one of those things that also stood out as very positive in terms of our test data. I mentioned that level 3, approaching grade level expectations. We have anywhere from 15 to 30% of students in certain grade levels performing at that level, the level of approaching expectations. And I mention that to you because there's a lot of work that takes place in terms of analyzing results and then wanting to actually think about the ways that we can support those students and exactly what skill deficits are they demonstrating, if at all, and how can we support them in terms of the work that takes place by teachers throughout the year. So that's a pretty substantial analysis that takes place. Principals work very carefully with their grade level teams and actually look very carefully at our iReady data, at our NJSLA data, and the kinds of things that we want students to be able to do within a class in the instructional environment. And then I mentioned to you about science. Science is, just to make it super confusing, is a completely different scale by the state. It's a 4-point scale, not a 5-point scale. But when we look at how our students did with regard to the percentage of students at level 2, we have a very high percentage of students at level 2, which is the science version of approaching expectations. So it's just something, again, that we want to note and be able to think about actionable steps we can take around that. So I'll spend a few minutes just talking about math. If you look at this chart, there's a lot on this table. Some of you, you've had this report, so you were able to look at this, but I'll direct you to the 2 columns all the way to the right, because that is students that are greater than or at a level 4. So you could see the percentages for each grade level. So we have a range of, in math, almost 53% at grade 8, up to 74% at grade 3. You can also see how we compare to the state in those areas. And just again, as I direct you to that level 3 column, you can see the percentage of students at level 3. You know, we have a high of 28.7% or 29% and a low of 7 or 17% or so. Right, so that's important to point out. This chart, if you look at this, you could see that the left column actually shows our percentages rounded for this year, just in terms of our passing rate. So grade 3, we had 74%, for instance. Grade 7, we had 72%. You could see the difference, again, in terms of how we did relative to the state in each one of those areas. So we far surpassed what the state average performance is. And then you can also see what our core score was for last year, 2023. So that's that column that's in the middle here where it says meeting exceeding 2023. So pretty much in each one of our areas, in the areas of math, we saw, with the exception of 2 grades, positive increases that were taking place anywhere from up to 9% of growth across the year. So, you know, we want to be able to look at that. We want to be able to act on that this year. You know, as again, I'll point out when we talk about 8th grade math, remember that that's very much something that is subject to how many students are taking algebra and how many students are taking geometry. Because remember, we remove those students from the grade 7 count, and that greatly influences the way that the grade 8 profile may look. So those scores relative to the state are actually pretty strong. So we see some good things that are happening actually within grade 8 math as well. Okay, so this slide right here is showing a number of subgroups. The state does require us to report out on subgroups. I think for the board's sake, it's very important that you just note the composition of subgroups, note the number of people that are within subgroups, and then think about, again, if you're looking at that far right column, that would be the passing rate for each one of those subgroups. The other thing to remember for the board is that there will be individual students that belong to multiple subgroups as well. And that's important. If you add up all of these students that are on this slide, that's way more than our enrollment, because those students are actually being represented multiple times. But this is something, again, as our community keeps evolving and subgroups change and grow, we just need to pay very, very close attention to this. And this is something, again, that building administrators and district administrators and teachers do have conversations about as well in terms of subgroup performance. This is another set of subgroups in math. Again, many of those students who are on the first page are going to be represented on this page in different ways again. And you could see just what the passing rates are for each one of the subgroups that are listed on the left side here. Okay, moving on to ELA. So same setup again. I'll just bring you through very similar sets of slides on this. This is our ELA performance. So you can look at this by grade level again, and you can look at this relative to the state. I'll kind of direct you again to that level 3 column as well, because the percentage of students at level 3 is a tight band of students, and we want to be able to make sure that we're thinking about steps that we can take to support those students, as with everybody else. This is that same look again at our 2024 passing rates compared to our 2023 passing rates. And you can see again the difference between our performance and the state performance as well. And then moving on to our subgroup data in ELA. So same sets of subgroups. You'll notice that the numbers, if you go back and compare these, the numbers and the counts may be different for ELA because there are some students that may be exempt from taking ELA assessment just because of a variety of conditions. But you can see again, as we begin to look at just performance rates and the size of subgroups, you know, that's an area that the board may want to consider kind of moving forward as well. And this is the same second slide that we had for math with a different profile of subgroups. There are other subgroups, but if they fall under a threshold of about, I believe the number this year is 8, we do not report on them. Okay. All right, science, I'll go through this very quickly. As I mentioned, it's a 4-point scale, advanced proficiency, going down to below proficiency. These are the areas that science addresses. There's 3 major areas that science will measure. This is our performance this past school year. You could see in that far right column, this is students that are scoring at a level 3 or above are passing. You can see relative to the state, our performance is strong relative to the state, but you know, we have a discrepancy between what's happening in grade 5 right now in terms of overall performance in grade 8. But I would think that that's going to begin to level out. This assessment being done only once every 3 years in the student's career is kind of an odd assessment. It's not something, again, that we can look year to year and say what's the factor for that growth. But it does give us a snapshot in terms of how our students are doing. I can say to you, the grade 8 teachers take this very, very seriously. They take this to heart when this happens, and they want to make sure that they're providing students opportunities that really assess during the year in a way sometimes that this assessment is assessing as well, because they're very, very complex problems and questions that the students are addressing during the assessment itself. This is our 2-year trend. You can see we were relatively flat in grade 8. But we had a big jump in grade 5 this year. Access for ELL. I'll quickly go through this for you. Just recognize that these students who are multilingual students need to take this assessment in the February-March timeframe, and then are also required to take NJSLA in the April-May timeframe. So these students get assessed a great deal. And this assessment's very different because it's a digital assessment. For certain grade levels, though, it's also a very labor-intensive assessment in terms of the teacher having to administer, you know, a verbal component to this. And then we're dealing with kindergarten, first and second graders who are taking this assessment. So it looks very different for our youngest children as opposed to our students who are middle school. The assessment results are used to make a determination as to whether or not a student has actually developed the language competency to no longer require ELL services within the district itself. This is very much like an IEP, though. You know, this is very much a legal standing that we identify students for this program, and we provide services for this program. And there's a very specialized teacher that is working with the students on a pull-out basis during the year, as well as supporting them within the classroom. This is the continuum of language acquisition. I think it's important that you just have this as background information for yourself. For students who are entering, they know and use minimal social language and minimal academic language. We have students that will join us that speak no English. And that's that's fine. And what we end up doing with those students is pairing them with an ELL teacher, but those students will spend their time in a regular classroom. Students pick up English acquisition very, very quickly. But what happens is, you could see on this continuum, is what they're going to be actually acquiring first are the social language and the social conventions. And that becomes really important for them. Until we get to expanding and bridging, you'll notice that the academic language is not something that is as secure for students. When they reach that point of expanding and bridging, it becomes more secure, and we could begin to think about exiting a student from needing that high intensive ELL support that the teachers provide for the students. So that's really what the assessment is measuring. Where are they on this continuum? Do they need to continue this type of support across the year? These are our results. I broke this down by K2 and 3-8. So you could see there's the continuum items 1 through 6. And those are the counts of students that are actually scoring at that level on the access itself. So a number of students, like the students at level 5, would be dismissed from the program. And we would provide additional supports after they're dismissed through just our regular educational program. But students that are in that 1 to 4 range will, likely continue within the program for at least another year, and then we'll assess and we'll make a determination on whether or not those students should be exited. Right. Just very quickly, in summarizing, just some action steps that we're taking as a district. As I mentioned before, we do have very specific strategic plan goals set in terms of just our overall performance on NJSLA, our overall performance on iReady. And the reason we're setting those is really because we look at that and we say that as students are progressing in their skill work and as we're focusing on certain things, we should see as a byproduct an increase in those scores. So we're really looking to have an increase of 7% over our 2022 baseline data. So again, if that continues, then we should see a 3 or 4 point increase in each language arts and math this year. As I mentioned, these areas, we've done a lot of work last year around our K-5 language arts curriculum. The board was very supportive of adopting just a whole new set of resources that are informing the work that teachers are doing with students. So we have a lot of consistency and a lot of continuity in terms of the approaches that are being used. And then there's a great deal of professional development that's taken place around that as well, especially when we think about the types of look-fors that we want to be able to see in a classroom and the instructional moves that we want to see teachers actually being supported with. We talked about, again, student growth goals, really closely tied to NJSLA and iReady. We've also looked at the idea of really carefully looking at our NJSLA and iReady results side by side with our other diagnostic information to be able to make good decisions about what we're doing for students and the types of things that teachers will be planning. And then as we talk about the benchmark assessments across the year, that's where we can kind of monitor this. The progress monitoring across the year becomes very important. NJSLA at the end of the year, it just tells us what happened. We're trying to kind of predict what's going to happen and make sure that we're making moves across the year as that's taking place. And then, as I mentioned, we have lots of discussions that take place throughout the year on this. A couple other things that have taken place. Warren Middle School is piloting an ASAP approach that's a little bit different than they've used in the past. We talked about this during curriculum committee, so we'll report on out to the curriculum committee at different points during the year. We did apply for and actually receive high impact tutoring money. So I think we have about $124,000 that through a grant through the state that we're actually using to support tutoring, extended day for students that are eligible for that. And we're also using our Title I funds for that. And then we really look at the idea of providing just embedded opportunities for students to have opportunities to just understand the nature of NJSLA items. They're just a little bit different than some of the other things that students might see within their assessments, but thinking about test taking as a genre, thinking about the fact that many of these students are going to be taking these types of tests for, much of their school career. There's a good correlation there that we want to be able to help students just understand, like, how should you approach those particular items. So that's part of the approach that we're using as well. In closing, the assessment schedule is this year. We're looking at NJSLA in May, and these other assessments are going to be taking place around that time frame as well. All right, so That's my conclusion, but if you have questions, I'm happy to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmick. I am going to open this to the board members for questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just wait till we're visually back on everyone's cameras. All right, thank you. We do not have a discussion item this evening. The only committee report, which would be the Ad hoc Strategic Planning Committee, will be carried to next meeting. So we are now going to move into the first opportunity for public commentary. This is the first of two opportunities for public commentary. I ask that anyone interested in addressing the board, please raise their hand or use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Each speaker is asked to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Please begin your comments by stating your name and address and by directing your comments to the presiding officer. Please know that the Board of Education welcomes and encourages input from the public. Public commentary is intended as an opportunity for the board to receive such input, but is not intended as a Q&A session. Following public commentary, if appropriate, the presiding officer or the superintendent may provide some response. For this first opportunity, we ask that your comments be limited to items that appear on tonight's agenda. There will be a second comment opportunity for all other comments later in the meeting. So at this time, I'm looking to our live audience relating to an agenda item, ma'am. We do have a microphone back there if you'd be so kind. And I would just remind you to please state your name and address at the beginning, please. Speaker. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Mildred Bole from Mount Bethel Road in Lawrence. So the question is pertaining to the new school that I believe is under consideration for preschool through, what is it?
We don't have an item on the agenda tonight on that. I'm happy to take your comment, but would you mind terribly just holding it for the second commentary period?
Sure.
I'd be grateful. Thank you. We will get back to you. I do promise. We'll just move the agenda items first. Do we have anybody in the Zoom audience that would like to speak on agenda items? Seeing none, do I have a motion to close public commentary?
Motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstain. The first opportunity for public commentary has closed. Dr. Mingle, do you have any comments on agenda items? Okay. We will be polling item A3, which is going to be read separately. That will be polled for a separate vote. Other than A3, does any board member have any other item to poll for discussion or a separate vote? Seeing none, Mr. Weinstein.
Items for board consideration, A1 through A2. Items A4 through A5, which I'm going to read right now. A4, resolve that the Board of Education affirms the recommendation of the superintendent and the special board subcommittee regarding student 4020600773 and approves the attached resolution. Item A5, resolve that the Board of Education approves the tuition and transportation contracts with Somerset County ESC for 2024 through 2025 regular school year for the following student at Somerset Academy. Items B1 through B4 and items C1 through C10.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hagel.
Right, I will call the roll on the consent agenda. Mrs. Dalton,
Yes.
Mr. Desai,
Yes.
Mr. Malfetta,
Yes.
Mr. Tor. Yes. Mr. Weinstein,
Yes.
and Mrs. Zahn.
Yes.
Motion's carries 6-0.
Mr. Weinstein.
Move for board consideration, item A3. Resolve that the Board of Education affirms the determination on November 18th, 2024, regarding HIB investigation number 270-250 MHS 10082-024.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hagel.
All right, I will call the roll. This is A3 only. Mrs. Dault,
Yes.
Mr. Desai,
Abstain.
Mr. Malfetta,
Yes.
Mr. Tor,
Yes.
Mr. Weinstein,
Yes.
Mrs. Zahn.
Yes.
Right, the motion carries 5-0 with one abstention.
Thank you. We do not have any unfinished or new business items on the agenda for this evening, so we are now moving to our second opportunity for public commentary. This opportunity is open to any topic you wish to raise to the board's attention. I ask that you again raise your hand or use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Remember that comments are limited to 3 minutes, and please state your name and address before beginning. And I do have someone in the audience, so please.
Mildred Bollig, 70 Mount Bethel Road. So the question is, I understand from, you had a previous board presentation talking about the need for a new school based on the increased population within Warren, correct?
We don't take Q&A, but please continue with any comment you might wish to make.
So I guess the question is whether or not you had considered adding on to existing school properties as opposed to having a centralized school for, what was it, preschool through, I'm not sure, K. Considering that you might need new administrative staff if you put everything together centralized in a new school. And then also considering that you'll have this cohort of students moving through the school system. And depending on, you know, how many new families move into the town, will you always have enough need for a separate centralized school with, you know, I think you said something like, I don't know what the numbers are, something like 400 or 500 is thinking. There were a lot of students that you have to care for coming into the town.
Just for the purposes of the audio, if you wouldn't mind speaking into the microphone, I'm sorry. It's just that we have people on Zoom and this gets recorded. I apologize. Continue, please.
So I'm not sure that every year you'd have, you know, 200, 400 or additional students coming into the school district that would warrant having a centralized school as opposed to having accommodate these additional students within each of the what is it that we have 3, 4 elementary schools and staffing it that way. That's basically it.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments. Do we have any comments in the Zoom audience? Seeing none, do I have a motion to close second public commentary?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstain. Second public commentary is closed. Yeah, I'll just take a moment to address it. We are at the very beginning part of doing presentations to the public, although we've been talking about it for a year now in finance committee readouts and about the need to respond to increase in enrollment. I can tell you that we find very, very valuable questions such as yours. It helps us communicate with the next steps as we talk to people about what our needs are. It helps us communicate in a way that answers those questions. I can assure you that the Finance Committee has already spent a couple of years pursuing alternatives and conversations, and it is our desire to be completely transparent at the appropriate time as we move forward. We certainly are going to be looking to answer those questions. I also encourage you to participate in a strategic planning process. That is a process that we are currently undergoing, which looks to build the plan for the next 5 years for the school district. And every member of our community, whether you currently or ever or never had children in our district, is a valuable voice in that process. So I certainly encourage you to participate in that as well, and to look forward, because we will be answering the questions you're raising as we move forward. Okay. Just for the outside audience, the individual in our audience here has asked about notice for these meetings. They are always available on the school district's website. We also communicate those out to the town, who puts it on their websites, and I understand they do blasts as well, email blasts. You'll find that they're also in the Echo Sentinel, because we make it public there as well. We have we'd be happy to take your email address and make sure you personally get email. It is our intent that, any way we can find to reach people, we want to do that. Okay. Yep, of course. Is that it? Okay. The next executive session listed on the agenda is not necessary. So at this point, Mr. Weinstein.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain? Opposed? The board is now out of session. Thank you.